Hey y'all, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Mogi, Beth, and for those of y'all who are new here, I own a six-figure reselling business selling women's clothing on places like Poshmark, eBay, etc. In today's video, we are celebrating a really exciting milestone of hitting $200,000 earned on Poshmark. Yay! If you haven't watched the video where we hit $100,000 earned on Poshmark, I'll link that up on the screen. In that video, we went over the 3.5 years it took to get to that $100,000 mark, the highlights within that 3.5 year journey, 3 lessons that I learned along the way, and then 3 things that I wanted to implement in order to get to $200,000 faster. So we hit that $100,000 mark on May 16th in 2020, and then we hit the $200,000 mark on March 7th of 2021 when I was on a break on YouTube. So I went ahead and snapped a screenshot on my phone, which I'll put on the screen, but that means it took exactly 295 days or 9 months and 19 days in order to hit that subsequent $100,000 earned on Poshmark. Okay, so it's been a little over 2 months since March 7th when we hit that $200,000 mark. And as of recording this, which is May 12th of 2021, we are already almost a third of the way to 300,000. We're a little over $232,000 earned. So we feel really excited and confident that we're gonna hit 300,000 even quicker. Again, I just need to clarify, earnings on Poshmark means that this is the money we are making in sales on Poshmark minus the fees associated with selling on Poshmark and minus the shipping cost. Another way of saying this is the amount of money that Poshmark is depositing into my bank account. It doesn't include cost of goods, it doesn't include labor, rent, or any other expenses. So I wanted to make that clear. Also, another thing that I want to clarify is that this is just Poshmark. We also sell on other platforms, and we're actually really growing on eBay, which I'm really excited to share with y'all more about this summer. So in this video, I wanted to do a similar thing that I did in the $100,000 video, in that I wanted to break down really the journey between $100,000 and the $200,000 mark, some highlights within that, and then more importantly, 3 lessons that I learned along that way, and then 3 things we're really focusing on and implementing as we work our way towards 300,000. I really like these videos because I think they're good benchmarks and practices for me to take a step back and share with y'all what I have learned from a broader lens perspective. I'm not creating these videos in order to brag, but I think our reselling experience over the 4.5 years can really provide a case study for those of y'all who aren't quite as far within your reselling journey or who are new to reselling. One of the sentiments shared in our $100,000 video is that it took way too long for us to get to $100,000 earned on Poshmark because it took 3.5 years. But for me, it really did take 3.5 years in order to acquire the knowledge, the confidence, and the systems in order to expand to a point in which we could make $100,000 earned in 9.5 months, and then the next $100,000 earned even faster. So the reason that we really create these videos and share everything that we learned is so that you can get to these milestones a lot faster than we did, and you can really expedite the process. So without further ado, let's discuss the journey from $100,000 earned on Poshmark to $200,000 earned on Poshmark. Okay, so I'm gonna put up a graph here of our total earnings on Poshmark over the lifetime of our closet, and the blue lines indicate the sales over each day. The red line is the summation or accumulation of sales over time. Okay, so now the highlighted section in pink is the time period between $0 in earnings and $100,000 in earnings on Poshmark, and then this section in green is between $100,000 earned on Poshmark and $200,000 earned on Poshmark. And obviously, as you can see, the time period between the pink section and the green section is very different. It took much less time to get to $200,000 earned. But if we zoom into the graph that just shows the earnings between the $100,000 mark and the $200,000 mark, then we can see that sales were actually pretty consistent during that time period. There were really only 2 periods that I wanted to highlight where sales dipped down. And the first one was in June, really kind of in the beginning of this period, where we took a step back from just listing, and we created processes, systems, training manuals, and hired a virtual assistant. I talked more about this in a video where I recapped our June sales, and I'll link that up on the screen. But I think this period was a really good example of taking 1 step back in order to take 2 steps forward. I'm a huge proponent of doing this in your business, especially when your sales start to plateau. And that's actually something we're doing in our business now, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the other time period that I wanted to highlight was in November. And again, I talked more about this in the November sales video that I will link up on the screen. But this was a period in which we were working on creating and publishing and launching our course, which took a lot of time and effort. And it really made me realize how much I am still a bottleneck within our reselling business. If I'm preoccupied with a big task or a big project such as the course, then I can't review drafts and I can't publish listings, and that means things aren't getting listed on our various platforms, which definitely affects sales. Probably the biggest thing that affects sales. So that realization kind of leads me to the next portion of this video, which is 3 lessons that we learned over the time period between 100,000 and 200,000. Okay, so the first lesson is automation, delegation, and doing as little yourself as possible. So within the reselling community, a lot of us, including myself, talk a lot about consistency and the importance of being consistent with your listings and practices in order to become a successful reseller, and how paramount that is. And while I 100% agree with that and still think it's true, the conversation that I think really we need to start having more is how to maintain consistency, especially when tending with the different variables of life and business. And the way that I have really figured out how to maintain and ensure consistency is through providing myself with as much support as possible. And the 2 ways that I have found to provide myself with that support is through automation and delegation. Automation, or AKA bots or plugins that you use to automate the processes on Poshmark, is a tricky subject because technically a lot of these bots or plugins are not permitted by Poshmark. And so it's a topic that people really don't talk about publicly, and people really feel strongly one way or the other. And so if you want to express how you feel in the comment section, please feel free to do so. But I've given this topic a lot of thought, and I do feel it's really important for me to talk on it here today, because so many resellers use bots and use automation services. And that's because the Poshmark's algorithm, as it is now, heavily favors resellers who share their own closet often. And I talk more about the Poshmark algorithm in this video that I'll link up on the screen, which most of y'all have probably already watched. But because the algorithm was built this way, a lot of business owners who have better things to do than to click buttons all day really gravitate toward these automation services, which in a lot of industries is really common. And on top of that, Poshmark today, as it stands, I feel fairly confident in saying doesn't commit a lot of resources to tracking down who uses bots and reprimanding or punishing those who do. Both of those things combined have created this situation in which there's an uneven playing field where people who use automation and bots obviously have a big advantage over those who don't. And the irony of this situation is that Poshmark claims to have really created this sharing system in order to make it fair. Unlike other platforms like eBay or Etsy, who really favor sellers who use paid promotions, or really favor sellers who have been reliably selling for a long time, Poshmark didn't want to create a platform that was essentially pay to play, or that really favored experienced resellers over newer resellers, so they created this sharing system. But the problem with the sharing system is that it requires so much mindless, monotonous, tedious, repetitive clicking of buttons. And complex, brilliant human beings really shouldn't be allotting hours of their day to clicking buttons. And so naturally, resellers or business owners who have hundreds, if not thousands of listings are going to look for shortcuts or solutions to this hours-long problem. And that's where automation comes in. And so frankly, Poshmark has a pay-to-play system. People pay bots, and especially bigger closets or more experienced resellers pay bots, which gives them an advantage over newer resellers or people who aren't paying for those services. And so perhaps that might be one reason why Poshmark is thinking about changing their algorithm, or really changing the way that the preset filter for their search is from just shared to relevant. And this isn't something that they have done yet, but in their multivariate testing, which is just them testing out just different features with a small portion of their users, they have rolled that out and tested that out and then rolled it back. And that would change things drastically and would create other problems. And if they do that, I'll definitely be sure to create a video on that and talk about those things. But as it stands now, sharing your own closet, your own listings is still a really important part of being a successful reseller on Poshmark. All of that being said, I'm not going to personally divulge whether or not I use bots or use automation for obvious reasons, but I am going to link to automation or bot services down below in the description. And these are affiliate links, so if you are interested in using bots, I would appreciate if you use those links because it helps this channel out and helps us create content like this. And each of these services operate a little bit differently and have different pros and cons, but they both allow you to automate your sharing and automate your offers to likers. I do want to say though, using bots or using automation is certainly not 100% riskless. There is a threshold, and I believe it's at 10,000 shared items per day, at which Poshmark could potentially flag your closet and put you in share jail. I've also heard of worse penalties or worse outcomes, so do so at your own risk. I'm not by any means telling you you have to go do this. There are potential consequences to doing this, but do your own research. And I just really wanted to talk about it so that you know, and so that you know that other people are doing this and that it does provide a potential advantage. Okay, so the second means of support is delegation. And in my $100,000 video, I really asked the question, what is it that I alone can do? And everything else really needs to be either delegated or on track to be delegated. The first way that you can delegate is by hiring employees. And that's something that we have done, and we're actually about to hire our second employee, which is really exciting. But if you don't want to deal with hiring an employee, dealing with payroll, dealing with taxes and different employment laws, then there's another option, and that is hiring a virtual assistant. So like I mentioned earlier, back in June, we hired our virtual assistant, and we were able to do so because Matt's brother has a lot of experience with virtual assistants and really walked us through the process, which was amazing. But if you don't know someone with firsthand experience that can walk you through the process, my really good friend Denali has created a course that I have a link to down below, and it is again an affiliate link that can act as your Matt's brother or act as your helper in walking you through this process, because it can be kind of confusing if you don't know what you're doing. So her course really removes the guesswork, and really I've heard nothing but good things about her course, and so again, that'll be linked down below. But I really simply could not do what I do without my employee and my virtual assistant. And honestly, I wouldn't want to, because hiring people and working alongside people really makes this job much more dynamic, and it makes it a lot more meaningful. So I'm really glad and grateful that I made the decision to hire people on and delegate a lot of these tasks, but I couldn't have done so efficiently or effectively without doing my next learning lesson, and that is systematization. Say that 3 times fast. So you really can't delegate without having proper systems in place. The job as a reseller can really be broken down into regular tasks such as sourcing, inventorying, photographing, etc. And it can be broken down into the irregular tasks such as return, repairs, stain treatment, cleaning shoes, etc. And so it's really important to create standard operating procedures, SOPs, or systems and processes around both the regular tasks of reselling and the irregular tasks of reselling. Creating these SOPs not only allows you to delegate, but it also allows you to audit each step of your process so that you can properly allocate your most precious resource, which is time. It also allows you to have a much higher level of control. And when these tasks become systematized and uniformed, it really allows you the ability to develop a thorough and realistic understanding of how long it takes to perform each task, which can be really beneficial when you're doing things like financial projections, which we'll talk about in a bit. But before we do that, I want to talk about something that really I don't hear a lot of resellers talk about, which is so important, and that is cash flow. Scaling your business to this size or even bigger comes with its own unique set of challenges, because there are a lot of businesses that can be profitable, but they can also have massive cash flow problems because of lack of understanding of how cash flow works, or just a lack of management in their cash flow. For example, let's say that I created a product and I had wholesale customers, and when I sold my product to these wholesale customers, I gave them 120 days in order to pay for those items. But let's say that I purchased those items from my supplier, who required me to pay those receipts within 30 days. I could technically be really profitable in this system, but because of the disparity between those two time frames, I could really easily run into massive cash flow problems. And this example can really be applied to reselling. If you think of the time between purchasing an item and when it sells, that can sometimes be months and sometimes even years. And so if you are depending on that profit, that cash, that income within a set time frame, say that you have to pay employees or your rent or your bills, then you can run into cash flow problems if you aren't managing your cash flow and your cash flow projections properly. This is a topic that is, I think, so important when running any kind of business, but especially a reselling business, and it's one that we're going to create more resources about soon, so stay tuned for that. But I really just wanted to bring it up because I hear this problem from a lot of resellers, and I just want to acknowledge that it's something that really does need to be discussed and something that really does need to be managed within your business. Okay, so those were the 3 lessons that we've learned. Now we're going to talk about the 3 things that we want to focus on moving forward. And the first one is actually in direct response to my $100,000 video, which I rewatched in preparation for this video. In that one, I talked about how hustle is overrated, and I still believe that to be true, especially the idea that you have to just grind instead of delegating or providing yourself with support and so on. But I will say, while hustle is overrated, the first point I want to make here is that discipline is not overrated. According to dictionary.com, discipline is an activity, exercise, or regimen that develops or improves a skill. But I really like to think of discipline as doing something that you should even when you really don't want to. And I think people who have 9-to-5 jobs look at reselling as a job with a lot of freedom and flexibility, and as a dream job in which you just have a lot of time. Because while reselling as a job comes with a lot of freedom and flexibility, which I love, it also comes with a lot of responsibilities and obligations that do require a high level of discipline. And so for those of y'all who are reselling full-time and have been for a while, or just really far in your reselling journey and you're not feeling the excitement or rush of motivation that you were in the beginning, I just want to say I get it and I totally understand it. And while reselling is the best job I've ever had and I still love reselling, it's still reselling just eventually becomes a job, and one that requires a fair amount of discipline. And that leads me to my second thing that we're focusing on as we approach $300,000 earned on Poshmark, and that is that eventually reselling becomes just a numbers game. And what I mean by a numbers game is that for me, reselling has really kind of been reduced to just numbers on a spreadsheet, especially since I'm not in the office day to day working on the operations of steaming, photographing, etc. Now I really view our reselling business as inputs in and sales going out. And this first started back in early 2020, when I decided I really wanted to scale our reselling business, Matt and I sat down to calculate different financial projections to better understand the different variables within our reselling business and how they influenced our performance. And as more time passed, we were able to collect more data that allowed us to better refine our projections in order to better reflect our reality. When we first started off, there was a lot of giddiness because our projections, or what we were expecting to make, was matching our results, and that was really exciting. But over time, it really just became more formulaic, which was both very satisfying and somewhat mundane depending on how you look at it. But essentially, our business now looks like, if we pay this much in labor and we list this many items, we can reasonably expect to make this amount of money each month. And that's a somewhat simplified version of what our financial projections really look like, but that's a topic that we really want to dive into more in the future and provide resources on, so stay tuned for that as well. But if you've created systems that allow you to have consistent results month over month, and you've collected that historical data, you can essentially plug and chug and come up with somewhat reliable financial projections for your profitability in the future. All that being said, the last point that we're really trying to remind ourselves and focus on while moving forward is to expect things to go wrong. While it is true that over time our financial projections have become more refined and better at predicting our future performance, it's still super important for us and for, I think, everyone to remember that your reselling business is still operated by human beings. So there will always be a degree of human error and uncertainty. Life happens, people get sick, people make mistakes, things pop up unexpectedly, whatever the case may be. The one thing that was really consistent from month to month when we looked over back on our performance is that we were continually failing to hit the goal that we had set for ourselves in terms of processing and listing, which inevitably affected our output. Which leads me to our efficiency coefficient. I'm not extremely familiar with this term. I believe it comes from the science world as it pertains to physics and energy production. However, it came across our radar when we actually received a bid from a representative when we were looking for some contracting work. And I thought it was a really clever way to encapsulate the slippage we were experiencing from month to month. When contractors give you a bid, they understand that in an ideal world, it would take X amount of hours and Y dollars in order to complete it. However, that's not always the case. And many times, barring a change in the scope of work, they'll be on the hook if they miscalculate the amount of time and work it takes to complete the job. Hence the efficiency coefficient. Essentially, this works as a multiplier in order to provide some wiggle room in case things don't go to plan. When applied to reselling, it has massive implications when trying to strategize the growth of our reselling business. So, for example, we are constantly aiming for or supposed to reach, according to our calculations, 600 listings each month. But for whatever reason, we are consistently hitting around the 450 mark. So we use this efficiency coefficient in order to better predict the more likely outcome. This is really important within our reselling business because when we're making hiring decisions or thinking about taking additional overhead, if we made those decisions with the assumption that we're going to list 600 a month based on our goals, and we wouldn't account for that inefficiency that's taking place, then we could quickly find ourselves underwater. I mean, just think of the cash flow problems that we talked about earlier. So moving forward, we're trying to just be really cognizant of that efficiency coefficient so that we can use it to make better decisions for our reselling business. Okay, so I just want to quickly review what we talked about, and I'm actually going to put timestamps down in the description below in case you wanted to refer back to any one of these segments. But we really went over 3 lessons that we've learned and then 3 things that we're focusing on moving forward. So the 3 lessons that we reviewed, the first being automation and delegation, the second one being systematization, and then the third one being cash flow management. Then the 3 things we are focusing on moving forward, the first one is that discipline is underrated. The second one is that eventually reselling becomes just a numbers game. And then the last one is that expect things to go wrong or account for the efficiency coefficient. Okay, so I hope that was helpful or thought-provoking to y'all. I cannot wait to read your comments and questions down in the comment section below. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, I'll see y'all in the next one. Love y'all. Bye.